Right. Hello. So yeah, we're going to have some bit of fun with database abstractions and just generally messing around with security things. Oh yeah, that's actually a good point. This is why I actually do put it in. There we go. Good. Right. So I imagine that if you're here at a PHP conference, you're going to be pretty confident that you know about SQL injection vulnerabilities. But just to briefly talk about it, it's just when a user value is being put straight into the SQL string. So this is what the developer, or now AI, might write, where it can concatenate in the user. So the user value of 123. Problem is, Spamton, if you've Undertale at all, comes along, our evil hacker, and just sticks this on the end of it. So in this case, we got our select from users where ID equals -1, no records, and then we're going to union on another query to get information from a different part of the table. So fairly boring stuff, because we've talked about this loads of times before, and people don't learn. Anyway, so in PHP, you might see it written like this. And most people in the room hopefully go, oh my God, what have you done? But again, think of your junior developer or AI developer who has just written this because that's what is quite common still. Now, one of the things, there we go, we then tell people to do is escape your strings, all right? And even you see a real escape string. Yeah, it's real this time. Can anyone see a mistake with that? Okay, so one person. Okay, I was surprised actually, but it's good to know because I forgot to put quote marks around it. Because real escape string also requires you to quote it. It doesn't actually turn it into a string yourself. Other database abstractions do it slightly differently. But imagine you've got a query, a big system, and you've got thousands of escaping strings. You're going to make a mistake somewhere along the lines. So what we go for next is parameterized queries. Now, if you go back to like PHP 8.0, this is kind of how the MySQLi extension kind of expects you to do it. Compared to the previous slide, you notice it's quite a lot more complicated. So to do it right, you have to write a lot more code than to do it wrong. Also, you get these lovely things, like you couldn't originally pass arguments by reference. And if you dared have multiple values, like type in question mark, question mark, question mark, you have this lovely bind parameters thing where it's 3 S's, because, yeah, great, 1, 2, 3. Pain in the backside, especially with large code bases. Now, fortunately, Camille came up with a slight modification to this, which made this so much better. Rather than having it as bind param like that, he passed an array into the execute function. So since PHP 8.1, you can do that. This makes it better, but still not perfect. Comparison. And then, this is now comparing it to having multiple values. Okay. I was talking to Camille behind the scenes and saying, could we make it a little bit further? Because ultimately, I always want the safest option to be easier than the less safe version, trying to improve the developer experience. So we take what we have there, and we now have a single function called execute query. Unfortunately, execute and query are already used, so we had to have a longer name. But otherwise, here's your string for the SQL, and then your array of values. So it means that from a developer's perspective, and remember, most of the time is people going to be writing this stuff rather than the interface. We're getting very close to doing it with the same amount of keystrokes. And of course, if you've got function completion, it's actually about the same. And I've gone that back around. OK, so that's basic SQL strings. And everyone's thinking, OK, but we don't do that anymore. We use ORMs or query builders, and they're going to fix all our problems. OK, so many years ago, I think this was a Cake PHP framework. I was working on a project where they'd had their own, they were basically using the Cake framework. I think it was. Anyway, they were almost the same, where it was very much, here's your ORM, and you're saying where, and I want an author ID of ID. It's really good. they took it a little bit further because of sometimes you can't just simply put it into the value. So you might say author ID is null, because you can't do equals null. Or you might have functions. And that's all good. Everyone's happy with that? Right. Now, in this particular PHP build, they had a thing which was saying, I want to be able to say what is a long-form article and which is a short-form article. And all they had is a cache on the word count, and they'd hard-coded word count is greater than 1,000. So the idea is the users of the website could say, oh, I've only got 2 minutes on a short form, or I've got something that, I've got half an hour, I want to read a longer form. Quite simple, and that's what it was written as. But the feature request came in saying, we don't want it just to be 1,000. We want the user to be able to choose what they deem to be long form or short form. Okay, this is how it's supposed to be written, where its word count is greater than, and then the count provided separately. Now, this was supposed to be a quick and easy change for a junior developer to do. They wrote this. Can anyone see the difference between doing it right and doing it wrong? Yeah? Full stop. Concatenates the two values together. He went to the first field, SQL injection vulnerability. I just happened to find it because I put a single quote in it, and the database complained, and I got, this is a problem. Fortunately, nothing got exploited, but that's how easy it is to make a mistake. And Spamton coming along, showing you an example of what could have happened. Word count is greater than word count. That can never be true, so we never get any results back from the first part. And then union on information from the admin table. Great. OK, so let's start some more recent frameworks. So Laravel DB, they have a lovely function called where raw. You should try to avoid this, but I will note, when you have some types of developers who think they are clever, experienced, they like the power of raw. I don't know why they do this, but every time they have an option to do it, they would write where raw rather than using the safer functions. I think that's a psychological thing we should probably look at some point. But in the meantime, this is how Laravel DB does it through the abstraction, which is actually 3 arguments: field, comparison operator, and value. We have the same thing again, where name, like, search. Seems fairly simple, yeah. Try not to do function calls in your where clause, but anyway, performance, who cares about that? This is an example of where you can do this. However, Laravel at this point is going to be good and reject this. The reason being is it quotes that first argument as though it's going to be a field. And that's good. It should be escaped. But the developer still wants to do a concat, and then they get told to use where raw to do the concatenation. This is where raw takes 2 arguments. The first bit is your SQL string for the where port, and then the second bit and onwards is your user values. So that's how it's done correctly. Guess what I found one day? It's almost like a repeating pattern. You get bored after a while. The developer just concatenated it in. I'm surprised it worked, to be honest, but yeah, it did. So you can just, again, another union select onto the end of it. Laravel's order by raw. So this is where people get introduced to the idea of order by email. You can then, if you did like an order by length, this isn't going to work, because for the same reason, it will escape it. So you bring in the order by raw to give you the extra power and the extra danger. Another example I found in there, I don't know why they did a sort by length, but they did. And you can get up to some really good fun with that. I really enjoyed playing around with trying to sort of extract information from it. But yeah, that's that. Now, another thing about Laravel is you start by order by name. If you were to do that, which is what you'd expect to see in your SQL query, so let's say you've got a developer who's not familiar with Laravel, they might try that. Laravel will correctly complain, and as in it'll make an SQL problem. What some developers don't know is you can call the order by multiple times and it will add them onto your query. Some developers will look at that and go, oh, well, that second one is going to replace the first one. I don't know why. They don't read the documentation. That's a recurring theme. But some will then just use order by raw because they're so used to, I need to get around the problem. I fix the problem by putting in raw. In this case, we had a developer, again, junior. Yeah, he was a junior, who was tasked with allowing that sorting to be done by something else. They just took the user input from the query string and they stuck it straight into it. And if it wasn't set, then it would pass in the default. They thought it was a quite simple change because they'd come across it without the. It was already order by raw, so they just put this in at the beginning, thinking that's an easy change, and it worked. You know, when they actually went to test it and they clicked on these links, it worked. So they moved on. And it was there for about a year. We don't know about that one. Okay. A little fun side task here. Order by. It comes at the end of your SQL query. It's relatively difficult to extract information from a database once you get to the order by, because at that point, you can't really add in any unions. I say this as a side task because I got quite proud of myself when I found out you could actually do something with this. Order by ID equals, now do a subquery, and you say select 2 from admin where ID equals 2. What happens is that then number 2 moves all the way to the bottom, because everyone else is false, as in their ID is not equal to that. So therefore you get 1, 2, 3, and then you get the fun one at the end. Why is that relevant? Well, let's expand on that query. And we then say where ID equals 2 and password like a percentage. And you'll notice that 2 goes back up again, so it didn't match. B, still nothing. C, oh, it's gone down. Now, you shouldn't be storing your passwords in plain text. We know that. We'll do that talk another day. But we now know that the password field starts with the letter C for the admin ID of 2. And obviously, you can see where you go from there. You start then testing the second character, the third character, just by playing around with the order by. So even though someone originally said, oh, yes, an SQL injection vulnerability, but no one can exploit an order by, and therefore it's a low priority fix, to say that I wasted quite a bit of time on that is a thing. But anyway, I wasted your time now. Okay. The next level down onto Laravel DB is you've got the select query. So rather than using some of the abstraction, you're just giving it the SQL query straight. And it has the same issue in that, write the developer string, you pass in the user value. And again, concatenation. And the thing I keep on trying to point out is it's so easy to do because it would work. The junior developer will just type it in. They're not going through all the documentation. They don't have the experience. They don't know how dangerous that is. So mistakes are easy. And I'm not going to just pick on Laravel. There's Doctrine. I can do all of them if you want, but just a quick one for Doctrine because there's a particular place in my heart for that. This is a way of breaking down the query builder part of Doctrine, where you're sort of saying select everything in from the U table, which I'm going to now say as user, and then you say where ID equals blah. Quite a simple problem. That is obviously insecure. To do this correctly, you have to write this monstrosity. Notice how this is considerably harder to write than what we had originally. And when we're thinking about making database abstraction in the first place, I want everyone to think along the lines of easy should be safe, the unsafe stuff should be harder to do. Even if that means that you have to actually type in unsafe at the beginning of every function to really hammer it home, you want the safe stuff to be easy. This doesn't make things easier. That's just one parameter. Once you've got 50 parameters, good luck. The other one is, I don't know, I think this was, I'm trying to be charitable with it. I just think someone got a little bit carried away. This is a way of sort of abstracting the query into the different parts. This is the simplest version. I had one which was over 100 lines, and you're going, what the hell is going on in here? And you're looking at it and go, okay, yeah, fine, so select from where, blah, 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 and X, right? So that's an X query over this. Database expression equals, fine. Type ID, number, cool. Separate things, I've made sure it's a comma. And we've gone is null and there. Brilliant, should be fine. Unfortunately, that argument actually goes straight into the SQL, unescaped. It's actually part of the SQL string where you're supposed to be doing those bind parameters again. Again, the right way to do it is incredibly hard and unexpected. If you're looking at that, you're thinking, well, that's a safe argument. We can put it in there. OK, so that's SQL. Let's have a quick look over at HTML, because this is even more fun. Twig, nice simple templating engine. You can take your HTML, put it into a template file. That's generally safe, but there's quite a lot of times where you just want to have a little bit of string that you want to render. This is how you're supposed to do it. Curly brace for your variable, and you pass that in separately. You're keeping the user values separate from the HTML, which is a safe string, has to be kept separate from the user values. It's someone else's job to combine the two. Classic example, someone just put it straight in there. I don't find it's normally the person who introduced Twig, because the person who introduces Twig into a project is doing it because they know what it's for. But it's other developers who come along later and go, oh, I just need to print out a value. I just need to put it there. And they're not necessarily thinking about why. Also, Twig is basic. It is a very simple templating language. It's complex in its own right. It's got loads of things to help you. Sorry, this is the injection one. But this is valid Twig code. But Twig does not care about context. So it will just allow you to put any value in there, and it will HTML encode it. It's great. You know, those less than signs, greater than signs, single quotes, double quotes, and the ampersand get encoded. So that should be fine, apart from inline JavaScript. Twig doesn't know that's a context of a HTML tag, so you'd have to sort of block that. You can use content security policy, but that's very much a band-aid that might save you if you mess up at the first part. But a bit of an issue. OK, now, advanced challenge. Image source URL. The image source can't include JavaScript. Anyone got any ideas how you would exploit this one? Yeah? Possibly, yeah. It's simpler than that. Oh, you've got it, I think. So we've got an onload. Yep. I'm missing quotes. But you're right. Oh, I've gone too far. Yep. Yeah, so you put the source as just /, then you have your space, and then on error, which is your onload thing. Because I have not put quotes in, it's not going to be escaped for that. So it's not going to be seen as a single attribute. The space is not escaped to an HTML context like that. So you now have error code running. Again, content security policy, the CSP, content security policy, try to disable all inline JavaScript. I know that practically it's very difficult to do, but once you've done it, it's a nice top on there. So anyway, you get the idea. Life is a little bit more complicated than we think of just simply saying, oh, just escape everything, or just use parameterized queries. Command line injection, this is just one simple one. Classic, just straight into the value goes straight in, the person's forgot to escape it. You can have all the usual problems with that, and just sort of give you an example of how you can just grep through a secrets file. OK, so I've been looking at this problem for too long, and I started looking at taint checking. And I thought I had a solution, which was to take the idea of taint checking, which I'm just going to talk about in a second, but take it further to try and fix some of the problems. I will note now that this is a dead end. But there is an idea in it somewhere, which is, okay, we're going to define a variable of a string. You can say that this value is untainted by user input. There is no user input in it. And therefore, this variable from this point on, until it gets modified, is considered untainted. If you were to take some tainted value, maybe it came from a database, maybe it came from the query string, or whatever, then when these all get combined, this becomes tainted, and therefore you cannot trust it. That's the nice theory about taint checking. You can later go and check to see if it's tainted. Where it goes a little bit wrong is when you start using the escaping, because you start with tainting, you pass a tainted value into an escaping function, and then you have a string at the end. That escapes it to make it safe, and that, in this context, perfect, brilliant. So now we can say that HTML is untainted, and we can do whatever we want with it, within reason. And this is how it'll be escaped. Everyone's happy, all good. But it assumes the escaping makes a value safe for any context, which you've probably started to bring together some of the examples from earlier. OK, href, special characters, URL, link. Tainted, there, that escapes those. Should it be untainted? Well, according to the rules, yes. But of course, your JavaScript's URL. It's forgotten the context. It doesn't know about the context. So we now have a system in place to try and say this variable is safe when it's not. And when you start going down that route, you start having developers be a little bit cavalier, and they're thinking, oh, it's great, now we've got taint checking, it's perfect. And they become a little bit more loose with the rules, and more mistakes get made. Seems weird, doesn't it? You know, that you've put in a security feature, and now you start taking more risks, and you actually get to a worse situation than before. I thought I could break this, but no. So HTML, image source, special characters, same again. Blah, 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 blah. Is that safe? No. Same, because I missed the quotes. Now, anyone who's on the advanced side of PHP want to have a go at this one, because I've got an image source with the quotes around it, HTML special characters. This is something that I got fixed in, I think it's 8.2, because I got caught out by this. What was special about the change? And I see Gina thinking hard. No? Anyone? Yeah, before, the single quotes weren't being escaped. You had to pass in a separate argument before 8.2, which would actually encode the single quotes. There was definitely embarrassment on my side when I did that, and someone pointed it out in the middle of a talk. So you get to laugh at me again. But I don't think it's unfair to say that once you've passed it through a HTML escaping function, you assume that all the 5 characters will be escaped. It wasn't. That's why I got a little bit upset. It wasn't a full RFC. It was just a cleanup thing at the end of the thing, and people went, oh yeah, it's a good idea. And it went through, so without really any questions. Oh yeah, so I was 8.1, sorry, got the numbers wrong. Cool. Same again, we did this at the beginning. Is it safe with a real escape string? Missing the quotes. So, taint checking is close. Okay, there is an idea there, and I confess that I spent too much time trying to work out how to take this further by saying, okay, what context are we in? And then trying to sort of go, oh, well, if it goes through this escaping mechanism, then it will be in this context, rather than just being a Boolean true or false. I tried to make it work that way. To say that it didn't work is an understatement. I just ended up making a bigger problem, and it became ever more complex. Ultimately, escaping is dangerous, and the context is hard. Especially, you're not going to want to build a HTML templating engine into PHP itself, as in to understand the context of every string going on, to say, all right, okay, it's a href. Href can't have a JavaScript URL. It's just not going to happen. So all the escaping should be done by a library, as in, because it has the domain knowledge, it can say, look, I know how HTML works. I can do the escaping for you. If you have like a database abstraction, that library will know how to deal with the database. It takes the idea of, I know better than you, and it should be the one who knows how to escape everything in a nice, consistent way. And then the library does all the hard work. You as a developer just throw values at it. But as we saw with some of the examples, there is a bit of an issue. We need a simpler solution than taint checking, not more complex. And I was watching a talk by Christoph Kern. He's a Google developer. He did these talks in 2015, 2016. I think I found them in around 2000 sort of time. I've never felt my project fall apart quicker than when watching that video. I got all these ideas of how to do taint checking, and he did this talk, and he provided a very simple solution, which meant all my work just fell between my fingers, and I go, oh, that's rubbish, because he was right. It is described in Building Secure and Reliable Systems, specifically page 266, if you ever find it. It's a paragraph long, just to give you an idea how small it is. But it gets summarized by Mike Samuel as distinguishing strings from a trusted developer from strings that may be attacker controlled. Okay, nice and simple distinction. You're just taking a string and just putting a simple Boolean flag, very much like taint checking, but we know that any string that's defined in the PHP code was written by the developer. We can't expect the developer to get everything right, but we trust them more than the user values, and we can keep them separate. Okay, otherwise we could just say strings from a trusted developer. Why is that useful? I will put a little asterisk next to the word safe, because I only talk about the context of injection vulnerabilities. I can't solve all your problems. I'll give you some examples later. Okay, so developer-defined string, as in the source code. Everything else you just see as unsafe. Okay, example. We're going to just take the end of a where clause and we concatenate it in. That's so safe, unsafe, that gets injected. And then our database abstraction, because it goes, this is no longer a developer-defined string, not going to take it. And now the developer, while they are writing the code, now knows, I've made a mistake. They don't have to go any further. There's no debugging later. It's immediate. No, that's not allowed. If you did an escaping thing, I'm sorry, but we can't trust you either. No, not having that. That's going to be blocked. You have to provide the user values separately, because only the database abstraction can reliably escape or parameterize the values. So it goes through there, all happy. HTML templating, exactly the same. The templating engine should be given the user values separately, and done like this. Okay. Anyone can see the trap coming, yes? Okay, that is safe, according to injection vulnerabilities. That is kept separate. The library, admittedly, I don't call that function like that. It doesn't work. That's okay. But I will say, it's only safe when talking about injection vulnerabilities because Phantom comes along and gives you the path of /. This is not an injection vulnerability to say that you have given an argument which is unsafe, not actually a command. So yeah, you get where I'm going with this. Okay, so just to sort of say, I can't fix everything, but this will certainly fix the injection vulnerabilities, which I should remind you still remains in the OS top 10 and everywhere else, and people think it's fixed, but actually it seems to be getting worse because people are thinking, oh, I use an ORM. I use a query builder. I use a HTML templating engine. It solves all the problems for me. Wrong. Okay, special cases. The where in clause, this is where you pass in a list of IDs. Let's say you wanted 5 different things, different IDs. You say where ID is, blunk, and we go from there. But did you ensure they're all integers? No? Well, boop, straight SQL injection vulnerability. One way around it, and I have a second, is you have a function which, like in parameters, or however you want to do it. The database abstraction should probably deal with this better, but watch what happens. Where ID in, we are calling that function, and we're simply giving it a count of how many IDs I have. I start with a question mark, which is defined in the source code. I then loop through the number of counts, appending on that each time. So we're building up another developer-defined string by concatenating it. When we get to the end, that gets returned, goes into there, and now we have a developer-defined string with the correct number of question marks. Small tangent, I would love it if MySQL supported the idea of just having one question mark there and you could provide it with an array, but that's not possible at the moment. That's a project for another day. The MySQL engine needs to be altered first, and then the MySQL extension in PHP also needs to be updated. That's a big project, not going to happen anytime soon, but just as a heads up, you can do it in other databases. I think there's at least 2 or 3 others which have better solutions, but if you're using MySQL or MariaDB, this is where you're stuck with, but this gives you a solution. Boop. Okay, order by. You're going to be providing a field name. That needs to be in the SQL. It can't be parameterized. Because one of the beauties of SQL with parameterizations is it's a 2-step phase thing where you build your SQL as a string, ideally with no user input. You send that to the database. It creates what's known as the query execution plan. If you get past that with no problems, that's it. It's now fixed in stone. So when you pass in the user values separately, those user values cannot modify that query execution plan. They're just going to be put in place. So it means it's logically impossible for there to be an injection vulnerability. It's a beautiful system. And also you can reuse the parameterized queries as well. But when it comes to field names, you have to provide a value first because it needs to be part of the query execution plan. This gets dangerous. So you could try to escape the field, but should we allow any field? I've seen that a couple of times now where basically the developer has allowed the user to specify what field they want to be in, but they hadn't thought, oh, could you sort by the password field or some other sensitive value? So what I'd like you to think of instead is, can we limit it to our safe list of, I'm allowing you to sort by these. You can have like a race search, or you can pass in the ID or whatever. So that's your list of values. This, because it's being concatenated with that, continues to be a developer-defined string. No user input went into making that string, apart from choosing which of those 3 options. I personally prefer this one a bit better, where you actually have a nice human-readable version of the key, and then it's the value is the bit which actually becomes your bit that goes into the SQL. So you can say, I'm going to sort by created. And in this case, they wanted to sort the articles by created date. Sorry, it's the people, actually. But they didn't care about the time component on it. They wanted to remove the time. I don't know why these requirements come up, but there you go. By doing it that way, you get to have nice URL-friendly names and values. But again, we're concatenating it in all developer-defined strings. OK. What happens when you cannot use an allow list? I would suggest this is incredibly rare, but might still be possible. For that, again, we have to go back to the database abstraction. The library should know how to escape identifiers. I shouldn't be expecting you, the developer, to know how to escape it. I've seen people escaping field names with the single quote character, which I can't remember which database accepted that, but it wasn't pretty, because you're supposed to use the backticks. So it's a different quoting style, and the quoting is double backticks rather than a backslash. Again, oddities that the developer should not need to care about. OK, so SQL is a developer string. I'm passing in, so that string, then I'm passing in the ID, but then I have the separate array, which I imagine no one will ever actually use, but someone's going to complain if you don't provide it, where you give an array of parameter values that can be searched and replaced by the library and say, right, OK, I'm going to take that user value. I'm going to escape it as in a safe way, put it into there, and you sort it. That's it. No one really needs to use it. Okay, now, how to use this today. I've written up a very basic web page, eiv.dev, or ending injection vulnerabilities. I'll put that up again later. You can do this in Python. Python have come up with the literal string type in Python 3.11. That was in October 2022. It was put forward by Facebook Meta. Python's type checking is a bit weird, so I'm not saying it's a complete solution. But what I found really interesting is I was reading their PEP 675 and going, this sounds very familiar to an RFC that I created. Turns out they had actually come up with exactly the same idea, but they had no idea about mine. So that gives me some confidence that we are actually going in the right direction, that two independent people have come up with an idea, which is the identifying of literal strings. Now, in other languages, you do a little bit of weird stuff. If you want to go into those, I'm more than happy to explain, but I've only got 9 minutes left. Okay. So PHP. In PHP, we have static analysis and the literal string type. How does this work? Well, in SARM, we're going to go with this one. Obviously, just install SARM as normal. You're going to need SARM at level 3 or stricter, which I would argue is unlikely for most projects, because most people start at lower levels and they slowly work up. When you get to level 3, you're going to be a bit of an edge case. But how does it work? Well, you're defining the class, and this is the library writing their class. And you'll just simply say, we're going to use the SQL string is actually going to be wanting to be a literal string. It's a very small change, because this is how you're supposed to be doing it already. Now, I realize this is very much at the bottom, so I apologize at the bottom for this, because the screen is a bit lower than I thought it was going to be. Select query, and then you have your ID. That's how it's supposed to be written, where ID equals question mark, end of string, comma, and then your array of values. If the developer had made a mistake and they did select star from user where ID equals single quote dot ID to concatenate it, SARM will actually pick that up and go, not having that, because I can see that is no longer a literal string. And now you've immediately got SARM telling you, no, we're not having this. You're going to have to stop, fix it now while you're writing it, while it's in your head, and we can move on. PHP Stan, pretty much the same there, just their levels are a bit different, and also the other way around. Try to get to level 7 if you can. Basically, it's the same thing. PHP Stan, param, literal hyphen string, and same query at the bottom, and it will also find that error. It'll immediately say, no, not having that. But there is a small problem. I realize I'm at a conference talking to a load of PHP developers who are very interested in PHP. I can't imagine that, I suspect most people here would have heard about or even know about SQL injection vulnerabilities to begin with. A vast majority of developers do not. They're your typical, let's say, WordPress developers. Now, I will confess that I'm for my sins, I should say, I'm the database component maintainer for WordPress, so I'm sorry. But I get to see some of the more creative uses of PHP, and you want to cry. But thinking of the fact that we are already becoming a bit of a self-selecting audience, that there's only going to be a certain number of people. I looked back at the JetBrains developer survey, and back in 2021, they asked a very simple question: do you use static analysis? 33% said yes. Okay, that's not necessarily too bad. 38% explicitly said no, and 28% said, I don't know what it is. So, we might see some projection forward of, okay, maybe given time, people might go, oh, actually, this is really worth it, and all good. In 2022, they changed the question and they said, which tools do you have? I've highlighted PHP SAN, SARM, and FAN. That gets us to 33% again. Okay, that's 2022. 2023. Oh, no, I've gone too far. Sorry, this one's another back button. PHP SAN's gone up. It's gone up to 26%. Ah, good, we're making progress. SARM's gone down and FAN's gone down. So we're still at 33%. Oh. There is also another thing which is a bit disappointing. When you go back to the original survey, they asked what frameworks to use. I don't think this survey is very representative of the developer ecosystem. Laravel is popular, I grant you that, but I don't think it's that much more popular than WordPress. If you actually reflected it in actual PHP use, you're going to flip that around, and that number of people using static analysis tools is minuscule, to the point where I'm sort of going, this isn't going to solve it. So my little project, and I'm watching Gina and Rowan, sort of going, please, is to basically bring this to PHP itself. I have put it forward for an RFC before where I had a function call which was is_literal, and you could pass in a variable and it would come back as true or false, very much like isArray or isString and things like that. I'm using it on a few projects. I've got a implementation and it is brilliant. There's so many things I've been able to do where I've gone, oh, actually, that's surprisingly easy. I've had quite a few developers working with it, and they got annoyed at me at first, until I pointed out every single one of them was actually a problem. I think the biggest one was trying to get one project which had used escaping values everywhere, and I'm kind of saying, yeah, I know, I'm sure you've done it right 100% of the time, but all it takes is for you to make one mistake somewhere. And they went, oh, fine, okay. Now it's quite a big project because it was several thousand search and replaces. But if you're using an ORM already, if you're using parameterized queries already, however doing it, you're probably just going to put this in, it'll go, you're doing something weird over there, and you're going to look at it and go, oh yeah, I am doing something weird over there, and you'll use it correctly. So that RFC failed. I'm not going to go into all the details because it was a very messy time. I'm hoping to bring it back again, but rather than it just being the function call, actually bring it as a actual type. I think in reality, no one's actually going to use the type. It's just, it would break too many things if you put it in. But if you still kept that isLiteral function, or isLiteral string function, then most libraries will be able to have like a configurable level that you can set it to, where you could sort of say, oh, in this context, you know, all the existing code, which we're going to ignore for now, but then you just bring it in and you can sort of do it as flags and things. Okay, and I'm nearly done. That's good. I can give you some examples of how you would do that, but I'm sure you can use your imagination, where you can sort of say, you know, you have a config on the library. But in short, Mike Samuel summed it up really nicely, and that's kind of what I want to see. It's just that being ability to distinguish strings from a trusted developer from strings that may be attacker controlled. And I think that's it. And I've got 1 minute to go. Thank you.